Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation. I'm Heidi.
I'm Robin.
And today we will be discussing the Season 1 finale, Chapter 8, The Upside Down.
Beverages for today, I'm drinking Javalia, medium roast, and so not all that interesting, but it's a recent find. I've heard of the brand for ages, but I've never actually tried it, and it's quite delightful. I enjoy it quite a lot.
I am drinking a Harney & Sons tea called Paris, which is essentially an Earl Grey with blackcurrant added in. So it's black tea and bergamot and blackcurrant. And it's so delicious. I love it so much. And now that we have acquired coffee, let's begin our contemplations.
All right. Chapter 8, The Upside Down, final episode of Stranger Things Season 1, opens on a tranquil, starry sky. Picking up as ever where we left off, essentially, but this is a few seconds of padding, so the tilt down on the extreme wide shot of Hawkins' lab sets the scene, the location, but it also lets you catch your breath, if you're binging it, and it also sets the tone if you're not, establishing place and setting really nicely. We're not in the Upside Down, and we're not in the middle of the action right away. The calm before the storm. And then we cut to Joyce yelling. And that's the beginning of the Joyce and Brenner interrogation scene. He says 6 people have been taken this week, and that, yeesh, that's always something that, I forget about it, and I think a lot of people probably do. It just reminds me of how the Demogorgon was a real problem. It reminds, it's kind of a throwback to when Callahan and Powell were telling Hopper about that. More people have gone missing, and it stands to reason that this would become a bigger problem eventually.
This scene does a good job of demonstrating how we are super invested in this smaller group of people because these are the people we know, these are the disappearances that we care about personally, but there is a much larger story at play here. And I absolutely love that exchange between Joyce and Brenner because she has absolutely no time for his bullshit. I find that, pretty much everybody underestimates Joyce. Her stability, her credibility, her intelligence. And Brenner is fully doing that here. But Joyce just destroys him. And as much as, he knows that she knows more than Karen did, I do not think he saw that coming.
And I really appreciate that she recounts her experiences, how they buried Will, how they had a funeral, because even though Joyce didn't believe he was dead, those events were still far from easy. They still took a huge toll on her and Jonathan. Meanwhile, in the next cell over, or some such, Hopper is getting tortured.
Honestly, I'm not entirely sure that taser hurts any worse than stuff that Hopper has done to himself one way or another. So I think they brought a knife to a gunfight. What they're attempting to do to cow him into submission and obedience and whatnot it just ain't working.
Far from scared, he tells them they're going to release him and Joyce, and they're going to provide whatever they need to find her son.
I understand that they were trying to keep everything quiet and whatnot, but, if they just hadn't drugged Hopper from the beginning, if they had just done the right thing and just been like, you want your son? He's in there. Go get him. So much chaos could have been averted.
Well, we even get that interaction between Frasier and Brenner where she says, what if they find the boy?
Yeah.
And Brenner, I think, is pretty confident. It's interesting. I think Brenner is writing on the fact that they probably won't find Will. And even if they do, he's probably dead, which is not an unfair assumption. And I think that Hopper, on the other hand, is banking on the idea that Elle will be able to take care of herself, because that's essentially what happens. He essentially gives her up, which is something that I always forget. I always forget that that's how they get at. That's how he and Joyce essentially get to Will, is he gives them Elle.
Yeah.
What goes through Hopper's mind here? What is he thinking? Because even later in the scene when he talks to Brenner, he says, I don't want anyone to find out about this, which makes me think he's not proud of this, but he also knows Elle can probably take care of herself better than Will can at this point.
That's fair. I really, really, really struggle with Hopper giving Elle up. In every rewatch I have done, I don't know, I guess I just sort of subconsciously decided that Hopper didn't actually give Elle up, and that there was some sort of master plan and master scheme, and that he was like, you know, Bobby Fishering, like, you know, 6 moves ahead and whatnot, or that, like, he had spoken to her. I was actively looking for justification and thinking something else was going on, and there's just nothing there. Like, he fully gave her up.
Even to the point where, like, he says, like, the boys are safe.
Right.
Do not harm the kids.
Well, that I totally get trapping Brenner into making that promise. Mm-hmm. I just wish that there had been some sort of secondary plan. Mm-hmm. And I feel like everything is really consistent with my reading of him up to this point and with my reading of him in other seasons, except the fact that he gave up Elle without a plan.
And I've been through that exact same, down that same road, yeah. But at the same time, every time I come to, well, he should have...
Yeah.
I mean, to borrow a phrase from a couple episodes ago, what is the rest of that sentence? I don't know. I don't know that there was an alternative. Because also, I mean, they were going to kill him. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they were going to do with Joyce. Probably not something great. Mm. They might have done some bad stuff to her in the same sort of vein as what they did with Terry Ives. They might have zapped her brain a couple times to, like, you know, turn her mind to mush, so that, because I don't know that they'd kill her outright. It's a bad situation, so it's a thing of, like, I don't necessarily blame Hopper exactly. It's just a thing of, it's just a surprise. It's like, wow, yeah, he did. He gives her up. I don't know. It mostly feels just odd knowing what the relationship between those two becomes. I don't think it's as messy as some of the other stuff we've discussed, but it is a little bit, it's disappointing.
Yeah, and they leaned really hard on the Sarah flashbacks to explain why Hopper is willing to go to such great lengths to save Will. Mm-hmm. But what I don't understand, how do you have this incredible drive to save Will and just be like, I'll tell you where your little science experiment is. Like,
I don't think he actually means that. I think that's more for Brenner's benefit.
That's true, but at the same time, I don't know that I buy it. I think I like my headcanon better that he had some sort of intricate plan.
Well, I do think it's important to note that he, as far as he and Joyce know, Jonathan and Nancy are still there. And I do think that counts, because I do think that if they were there, they would have had a car. Without the teenagers there, they cannot get away. They're trapped in that school. And Hopper doesn't know that. So I don't know if that's intended in the script at all, but I mean, that's what I headcanon. My headcanon is that he relied on Jonathan and Nancy, who weren't there because they left. And that actually, speaking of that, we didn't talk about this last episode because I didn't think of it then, but it also made me wonder, or I guess reconsider the fact that, yeah, Jonathan and Nancy just leave the children there. Like, I mean, I'm all like here, like, rah, like, yeah, go get the Demogorgon. But then at the same time, I'm like, but you left the kids completely unprotected.
Right.
And back at Hawkins Middle, Mike goes outside and he becomes aware that they are now alone. And when Mike goes back into the gym to relate this information, Elle relates that the teenagers have gone after the Demogorgon, and it made me wonder, how does she know that?
I have no idea.
Like, since when does she have telepathy? The show doesn't make any attempt to explain how she knows this or what she means. She just says Demogorgon. Like, did she overhear them?
I have to assume that she did. Yeah, it did actually kind of take me out of the moment.
You didn't need it.
Yeah.
You didn't need her to know. Because then the next time we see them, you know, when she says Demogorgon, then it cuts Jonathan and Nancy. But the next time that we see the kids, they're debating over what to do. You could still have that argument. You know, you don't need to have Elle go, this is where they are. And I think probably the reason it's there is for that transition. Which I feel like the quality of the writing of this show is high enough that they could have found another way to do that without, like, going, oh, we'll just sneak this in real quick and hope nobody notices.
Exactly.
But Nancy and Jonathan have gone back to the Byers' house, and they do start to prep the space for catching the Demogorgon.
When we see the construction of the much-lauded spiky bat.
This is one of those moments where I really wish there was, like, a DVD with, like, thousands of hours of behind-the-scenes content, because I would love, like, an art department's featurette on, like, the weapons, you know? How did they make it? And did Charlie Heaton actually nail nails into this wooden bat? It looks like it. Jonathan and Nancy put all the lights back in, which must have taken quite a while. I also, speaking of the props, one costume note that I would like to mention is you can see Nancy is still wearing her ballet slippers necklace. And I love that detail. It's just really, it's a nice touch because even in the midst of this badass montage, there's still this sign that Nancy is Nancy. That part of her isn't like completely eradicated or erased. It's consistent. I don't know, that really warmed my heart. I really liked that. And so an additional shout out to and credit to the costume designer, Małgosia Trzanska.
Yeah, that's a really good catch. She has moved in this very badass direction. You know, Dustin even points that out quite correctly. Like, she's kind of a badass now. And I love the contrast between her wearing those, like, kick-ass boots. I have, like, especially since lockdown started, kind of taken a deep dive into fashion and fashion history and personal style and all that kind of stuff because it's much more fun to dwell on clothes than it is on a pandemic. But I find myself becoming a lot more aware of, like, you know, costume design and that kind of thing. And contrasting because they're not combat boots, but they're like, and they're not hiking boots, but they're badass boots with the ballet slippers necklace is a really subtle and effective way of contrasting the balance of Nancy's characterization because she's allowed to be badass and still vulnerable. That I think is really cool because you really don't get that very often.
Like her whole look is the color of the color palette of what she's wearing. She's in these very muted earth tones. She matches Jonathan's costume. She matches the entire color palette of the buyer's house, which is very different from a lot of the colors we've seen her wear up to this point. And so it's like she's blending into this backdrop, but also she still has this piece of her of what she was before. So it speaks volumes about her as a person, but also, like, it really kind of covers the entire history of the show up to this point. Back at the lab, Hopper and Joyce suit up and enter the Upside Down. They enter the gate and finally arriving at their goal, or almost, anyway, at the place they've been trying to get to all season. And they share this look before they go in, and this is precisely the right point to have these two arrive here, particularly Hopper. They haven't known fully what they were up against, and these two people would go charging into a situation even if they didn't have all the information. But now they know what the monster is. They know how the gate came to be. They know what's inside, and they know they're suited up. They're well prepared, and so it makes the payoff for us as viewers that much richer, having them overcome all the obstacles at last rather than watching them fail too early. And it's just a great example of getting characters to their natural conclusion, facing the final adversary or challenge at the right time.
Stranger Things is known in a really positive way for having a lot of pastiche and references and so on. And the two that like really, really, really jump out at me in this episode are weirdly things that are not from the 80s. One is The X-Files, and the other is The Return of the King. So in this episode, Hopper and Joyce actually remind me a bit of Mulder and Scully in the X-Files movie because they have to go into the lair of the adversary. But there are some very strong X-Files vibes happening, and I am never, ever, ever mad about it.
And so into the gate they go, and thus the cold open is over, and we're into our title sequence. The first shot after the cold open is an upside down angle, turning to position Hopper and Joyce upright in the frame. It's a little on the nose, but it's fitting, and it's executed beautifully.
Yeah.
It's not overly ostentatious, so I like it anyway. It's like a thing of like sometimes the obvious thing is the right thing.
It gives you a second to orient yourself and say, oh, okay, we're in the upside down. Got it. And it also gives you a second to wonder, and I don't know if we actually have an answer for this, whether the upside down is actually quite literally upside, like we both share the floor, we're going up one way and then up another way, or whether the two dimensions are just on top of each other and occasionally there's a doorway through.
I think probably the fandom has decided it means upside down because it's what's in all the merchandising and all the art, so.
Right.
Joyce's labored breathing trigger part 1 of Hopper's flashback, revealing at last what happened to Sarah. And I want to give a shout out to this actress, Elle Graham, who plays Sarah Hopper. She's dynamite. She's really good. Like, she does a lot with very little.
Yeah, and she's so young.
An additional shout out to Carmen Cuba, the casting director, because again, bullseye with casting the right person.
That moment, I have mixed feelings actually about the flashbacks. The flashbacks as we see them are perfect. I don't think that I would actually change anything about the flashbacks themselves. For some reason, I find Hopper saying, "Troll's favorite food, princess with paprika and gravy." Like, that's so sweet and like such a dad joke. But I think that the stumbling block that I come across with the flashbacks is I think they should have been much earlier. I don't actually think that it was necessary to bury the lead quite so deep while referencing Sarah and referencing his feelings about Sarah and his guilt at not being able to save Sarah is very important to his motivation in this scene. It takes time and attention away from the immediate moment when it's not necessary. We could have known all of this about Hopper much earlier without lessening the impact of how devastating and traumatizing, just how incredibly tragic this experience was for him and how it completely like rewrote him on an atomic level. Yeah, like, so the scenes themselves are perfect. I just think they could have come earlier in this season.
Funny, because I 100,000% disagree. And the reason for that is because I think this is an effect. This, to me, the use of flashback here is brilliant because by having them be here is, to me, it's actually communicating to us what Hopper's actual mindset is right now. He's been suppressing these memories. And that now when he's in this moment of like, they're literally going to find Will one way or the other, he can't quite tune it out anymore. It's right there, right at the front of his mind, and he can't get away from it. I mean, literally all of his flashbacks in this sequence are triggered by things that he sees or hears. So here it's Joyce's breathing, later it's he sees the stuffed animal on the ground, and then at the end it's finding Will, and he's seeing the thing in his mouth, and that he has to pull it out of his lungs, and there's all these direct correlations. The other thing that I like about it is that this is the moment. He's right up to it, and it creates this just absolutely beautiful parallel, three-way parallel between the three sets of parents in this story: Joyce, Hopper, and Karen. And so to me, having it all be just stacked right on top of each other, it's just, to me, the season finale was the perfect place for it. Like, just conceptually, like, we've known all along, but to me, having it finally, like, just spill over, it's exactly the opposite of those cutaways that we got back at the Ives home, where it's like, those flashes are unmotivated. These feel completely motivated, and I love the way they're used here.
What is happening to Hopper is that he is being triggered because, as you point out, it's things that he's seeing and things that he's hearing, and he is pushing himself headlong into this situation because he's desperate for a different ending this time. And not to get too personal, but I think maybe what kind of strikes the wrong note for me with these scenes is that you see good things in this moment when he's getting triggered, whereas my own experience with being around something that I find very triggering, it goes immediately to the bad traumatic memory, and it just stays there and just dwells on it. So we know what happened to Sarah come earlier in the season, and then in these moments, like when you see Will and when he's remembering Sarah with the breathing tube, I would have got like a lot more aggressive and traumatic with that footage, like zoomed in on Sarah's face and made the beeping really loud and like just made the memories, or like his experience of the memories, more violent.
And I guess, again, that just might be where we're different, because I think, to me, that's not my experience. The way that they portray Hopper going through the whole gamut of the whole experience and her whole battle with whatever, I'm guessing cancer, but whatever disease or condition that she had, feels very authentic to how it's been for me. So, but again, everyone's experiences are different. Yeah. So back at the Byers, Nancy and Jonathan cut their hands to draw the Demogorgon with their blood. And that's then we swing back over to the school where the kids debate what to do. Again, I got to admit that them debating whether or not to follow the chief's plan is very much repeated in season 2. You know, Mike is antsy, and in both cases, he's right. Although the others are right too, in that moving is dangerous since they're still, quote, fugitives, and Elle's powers are limited because she's wiped out. The casual manner in which Mike says, Elle can find them, like it's NBD. This makes me wonder if it's another reason he's so adamant about not taking her powers for granted in season 3 specifically, because they took her powers for granted here, and even though Mike didn't ask her to use those powers, it's by her using them later that they lose her. The trauma of that may have lingered and created a real fear around the idea of her working too hard when she's too tired, even just risking her risking her life and sacrificing herself for others. And again, granted, that's her choice, but this line in particular and the way in which he delivers it may reveal that he himself didn't take it seriously enough. In his mind, anyway. Like, even if you could contextually say, no, Mike absolutely took her power seriously, blah, 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 maybe he didn't, or he doesn't think that he did. So that may explain where some of that, like, manic, argumentative stuff comes from in season 3. With Matt, against Max specifically. So despite that casual manner, though, Lucas and Dustin insist that they're safest where they are, and they wander off. It's not just Dustin, it's Lucas too, wander off in search of chocolate pudding.
And I also really like that he realized that Elle was going to need food. Not the first time that he has been the one to bring up food when nobody else is even thinking about it. But it must be said in his defense that, with Elle's battery being super, super low, a shot of that, like, sugary stuff would probably be really useful for her.
On the buyer's couch, Nancy and Jonathan bandage each other's hands, anxious and waiting for the Demogorgon. And some romance creeps in when they quasi-hold hands and Jonathan just says her name.
I have to point out, for someone who was struggling with his accent so much, like, his delivery of that line of just saying her name is perfect. Like, the acting is perfect.
And there's the briefest moment of possibly them leaning in when, not unlike Mike and Eleven last episode, they're interrupted by way of a sharp knock on the door, making them both jump about a foot in the air. And I'm pretty sure I did too. The first time I watched it, like...
I mean, Nancy's sitting there going like, oh my God! Right. And Jonathan's like, dude, it's the wind.
I also like the way that the shot starts wide and does that, like, really sharp dolly in. It emphasizes that sense of sudden surprise and anxiety, like a visual representation of a gasp. And so kudos not just to Tim Ives, the DP, but also to Bob Gorlick, the camera A operator, and Jeff Crumley, SOC, camera B operator, because I don't know which of them is responsible for shooting this scene, so they both get a shout out. And SOC, by the way, is the Society of Camera Operators, which was actually something I did not know until I looked this up. So, yeah, we're in the middle of this moment, and then bang, we're cut off from it. And because Steve himself has come to apologize, and he's surprised to find Nancy there, but doesn't...
But takes it in stride.
Yeah, doesn't make a thing of it. We know that she's like, the monster's coming, leave.
Yeah,
you can't be here right now. But even then, Steve says, I'm not here to start anything, insists on saying that he messed up. And my God, the acting here. Normally, I kind of let you take lead on the voicing our appreciation of the actors and their performances, but damn, these two are good here. Not only is Kiri's performance so believable, but so is Natalia Dyer's. I love watching him wrestle with those words, meaning them, knowing that it's right, but also the humiliation and the sting of being wrong and sitting in that. The look on her face after he says, I messed up and I want to make things right. It's very sweet and very heartbreaking because she clearly still cares about him, everything else notwithstanding. And I don't think that I picked up on that until this rewatch. It's so good. Steve cuts himself off, though, while pleading for her to hear him out, when he sees that her hand is bandaged and says, what happened to your hand? Yeah, he defaults to concern.
He does, and he defaults to caring about her. It is a little bit tricky. Someone who actually cares about Nancy and Nancy's well-being would not have behaved toward her the way that he did. And I think that, as of right then, I don't know for sure, but it would be reasonable to assume that he still thinks that she cheated on him with Jonathan. And then he goes to try to make peace with Jonathan, and she's the one who opens the door. I think that a more volatile or less worthy character would flip immediately from wanting to apologize and wanting to make things right to feeling vindicated and becoming that much nastier.
This is one of those moments that I look back on with a lot of amusement because the first time watching this, I didn't pay much attention, pretty much any attention to the details in the sequence. I think my reaction was sort of like Nancy's, but without any compassion. Like, oh, why are you here? Mm-hmm. Can you just go away, please? But then when I watched it the second time, I was really brought up short by this moment because the sincerity and warmth in his voice when he asks that question, what happened to your hand, really jumped out at me. And I did not want to give him that point, but I had to. Because, like you said, in spite of everything that happened, that is a very candid moment. And then he sees the blood and realizes and like kind of takes it all in, and he pushes his way in thinking that Jonathan may have hurt her.
Mm-hmm. He reacts appropriately. Because when someone you supposedly care about shows up with an injury, you care about the injury and not the fact that they showed up in a place that you weren't expecting them to be.
Yeah. He sees the whole crazy setup, and he and Jonathan nearly come to blows again. And like, what? He was going to fight Jonathan again? Not only after losing the first time, but still being pretty beat up?
Yeah.
Nancy, however, avoids a fight by aiming the gun at Steve, and I had to laugh when that happened because it made me want to go, so Heidi, is this what you meant a couple episodes ago by Nancy getting in the middle?
What, I love that.
And maybe she learned from that alley fight not to just stand there.
She's like, enough of this shit. We're not doing this again.
Yeah.
And I notice he reacts a lot more violently to Jonathan picking up the bat than he does to her waving an actual factual gun in his face. But the exchange between Jonathan and Steve is totally different. You know, Jonathan saying, I'm not asking, you need to leave. But even then, it still doesn't have the combativeness and the hostility and hatred that any of their verbal exchanges or physical altercation in the alley had. I also think that Steve sees immediately that Jonathan's hand is bandaged as well. He sees that, like, some weird shit is happening. Yeah. And I think it's a little bit to Steve's credit that as little as he thought of Jonathan even, you know, a few episodes ago, when he rocks up in the house, he's like, I mean, he has a what the hell moment, but it's a concern what the hell moment, not a you live in a dump.
They're both actually in earnest this time, and actually are both right. They both have absolute, complete grounds to be saying and feeling and thinking exactly what they're thinking. Mm-hmm. That doesn't exactly go away when he gets inside. It's just like, wait.
And I don't think that Jonathan has any, you know, he has no problem with Steve being concerned about Nancy's welfare. Mm-hmm. I mean, Jonathan himself is pretty invested in Nancy's welfare.
The tone from all three of them is desperation. Everything, like, just blitzes by to the point where then they're in the middle of this sort of standoff, and then that's when the lights start to flicker, the Demogorgon arrives and bursts through the ceiling, and the whole time Steve's like, where is what? Like, what's happening? Yeah. And they're like, where is it? You know, and when it appears, if they rush into Will's room, Steve is yelling in complete confusion, and who can blame him, really?
Yeah.
They yell at him to shut up, and he does. Mm-hmm. Even then, they listen and they wait inside the bedroom until it vanishes, and the trap is left unsprung.
I laugh, but not at Steve's expense, every single time when he's just going like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And then he like leapfrogs, you know, over the bear trap and is like, oh my god.
There's actually a really kind of cute parallel between him going, oh my god, and Dustin going, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, during the van chase. Last episode, because that's what Dustin does. And knowing how much they bond next season, I kind of love that.
The way that Jonathan and Nancy are just like already, regardless of, you know, what else we think about their developing relationship, like how well they work together as a team. They're seamless. They're like Vulcan mind melded, it almost seems like. Mm-hmm. And the moment when they're waiting for the Demogorgon in Will's bedroom, Nancy says, do you hear anything? He says no. Clicks, the lighter closed. In that moment, especially, the sound design is really great, and it just has this like finality. I certainly was feeling the effects of it as an audience member, but I did not pick up on how brilliant it was until you pointed it out.
Like, why I think that's so cool is because it's conveying to the audience, like, no, the danger has passed.
Right.
When he flips the thing closed and says no, what the sound design is telling us is that you can believe him. Mm-hmm. If it turned out he was wrong, then it would be lulling us into a false sense of security. But it's making you as the viewer feel safe. And so it's another one of those like non-verbal storytelling techniques, and it's really good. The sound design in this whole episode is fantastic. And I really like, too, that when Nancy and Jonathan turn to Steve and say, shut up, it doesn't feel cruel. It feels pragmatic. And it doesn't feel like it's there for comedic effect. Steve knows how to be on a team. Mm-hmm. He knows how to be a team player. And I think this is like probably the first moment if he's like, okay, I'm now part of this. I need to follow their guidance. And that's really nicely set up. Despite some peaks and valleys in this mini arc that they have in this episode, I actually think that like it's pretty remarkable how well this trio come together, because I think that would be a hard sell on paper to believably be a team, and they succeed. Back in the Upside Down, Joyce and Hopper press on and find the empty hatched egg, followed by the remains of Castle Byers, but no sign of Will.
What the hell was that? The egg?
I think that may have been one of those things of it's an homage for homage's sake.
Yeah, because it's very alien.
Yeah, and it's one of two massive alien references in this episode. So if there's anyone listening who does have a theory or even conclusive evidence of what the egg is supposed to be for, if that pertains to the Mind Flayer or the Demodogs, but neither of them seem to come from an egg. So a stuffed animal on the ground prompts more flashbacks of Hopper and Sarah in the hospital, first in her room, then Hopper alone crying in the stairwell.
I do think it's like a really, really beautiful flashback. I love Harper's acting. Him holding Sarah's hand and his wife's hand, and like, you know, all three of them, and his wife getting emotional and trying to hide it, and of Sarah just being a kid in that moment, just like enjoying this story, and of Hopper creating the veneer of strength, and then like Harper's physical acting curling in on himself, and when he turns his face to the wall while he's crying because he is so desperate not to show vulnerability. It's heartbreaking showing Hopper's vulnerability without undercutting his agency or his dignity. Hopper would have felt differently if he knew other people could see him in that moment. But we know better.
We cut from there back to the teenagers who, it seems, are in fact all alone. And in the silence, Steve starts to lose it, and Nancy tells him once again to leave. It was actually kind of cool. I said how that moment does feel a little cruel, and you observed that it's possible that, you know, even though she says when he first shows up, I don't care about any of that other stuff, that, yeah, she might. And then,
she absolutely does. How could you not?
Right.
How could you not? Because this is the first time that the two of them have been face to face since that incident. So when she says, I don't care about any of that, what she's actually saying is, there is something a great deal more important going on right now. I have to deal with that, and then we'll talk about your garbage behavior. You know, but like, I'm not mad that you let your friend call me a slut and spray paint it. No. Bullshit. Or not, like, I'm not actually saying that, like, Nancy did anything wrong in that scene. She didn't. But if they had been on better terms, I would have liked to see her say, that thing that you just saw, it took Will, it took Barb, we set a trap for it because we're trying to kill it. It's going to come back, so you need to leave.
That's a brilliant solution. To actually give him the information would make him stop. That would actually make him, like, be quiet and probably leave. Yeah. Would have benefited, I think, the characters in the scene, but also I think it would have just made the scene a little bit better as a whole. Especially because this is, like, this moment of pause. You know, no, I'm still really pissed off about what happened. Like, if there's space for that breadth of reaction, I think there's also space for what you came up with. Yeah, she tells him to leave, and he does. And he runs out to his car, fumbles with the keys, and he's halfway into the driver's seat when he hesitates, seeing the lights flash and flicker inside again. And we leave him there, hovering at his car, while inside the lights continue to flash and go, you know, like crazy until they go out entirely. I still think it feels like an earned twist. Again, it's not a new technique, but it works so well. It's so effectively executed. So the monster does come back.
What I like is that it immediately pounces on Jonathan and divests him of his weapon rather than immediately pouncing on Nancy and taking her weapon away. I could see where the decision would have been like, oh yeah, the Demogorgon comes and attacks Nancy, and that's why Steve comes back, because he's worried about Nancy, and then Jonathan and Steve, even though they hate each other, team up to save Nancy. Like, I could see how it could have gone that way, and I'm just real glad that it didn't.
And this is also the other moment that I would cite as the absolute brilliant use of sound design and sound mixing, because not only do the lights go out, but then the sound on top of that really sells that jarring loss of stability. And it's subtle, just like in the scene we mentioned before, but it's definitely there and definitely contributes to how well that visual works. It's just excellent. So huge shout out to Craig Hennigan, sound designer, Brad North, the supervising sound editor, and the re-recording mixers Joe Barnett and Adam Jenkins. Fantastic job, guys. And so the Demogorgon tackles Jonathan and leans over him, and this is our second Alien or Aliens reference. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the franchise well enough to know which of the two, but I know it's in that franchise somewhere.
And it's real gross.
While he's pinned on the ground, though, Nancy fires the remainder of the loaded bullets at it, luring it away from Jonathan, and for some reason, she doesn't lead it down the hall towards the bear trap.
She keeps forgetting the plan.
Yes. And I don't know, panic, adrenaline, perhaps? And all hope seems lost, but that's when Steve rushes back in, takes up the fallen bat, and starts hacking away at the Demogorgon. And because of this demonstration, as you said earlier, he manages to knock it into the bear trap. Also, for the record, I would count this as winning a fight. But Dustin wasn't there, so...
So he doesn't know.
He doesn't know.
I do remember not knowing how I felt about Steve through the entire season, being like, maybe he's okay, maybe he can sit with us for half of lunch, etc., etc., you know. And then like, oh, wow, you're a piece of shit. And then him coming back and being like, I mean, maybe you can live. But like, by the moment of the bat twirl, I was like, okay, all right, I like Steve. You can sit with us for all of lunch now, as long as you continue to behave yourself.
Back in, I believe, episode 2, we together both noted the scene where Joyce runs out of the house, gets in the car, sees the lights flickering, and decides to go back in. This is basically the same character decision. Prior to the podcast, I always look at this moment and want to be like, it's no big deal. Okay, so he goes back in, whatever. But it is the same decision that Joyce makes. It made me stop and question, like, okay, if it's praiseworthy for Joyce, then it's praiseworthy for Steve, too.
Mm-hmm. It's not often that I see myself in Steve, but I do actually see myself in him in this moment, both in the running away and in wrestling with the decision whether to go back. Now, I've never met a Demogorgon, thank God, but many, many times I have ended up in a situation, and I think we all have, where a situation presents itself to you, and it's like, there's the right thing to do, and there's the safe thing to do. And it's not, it's not usually as cut and dry as fight the Demogorgon, don't fight the Demogorgon. But in that moment, whenever it happens to me, I usually have this feeling of, all right, let's do this. It is not about being brave. It's not even about like, I want to feel like a good person, so I'm going to do this. It's about, I can't watch this thing happen. And I do think, though, that this action on behalf of Steve is very, very praiseworthy, not least because it's a direct parallel to Joyce. I didn't even think of that, to be honest. I was thinking about how he goes in knowing that Nancy is mad at him. I mean, if I were in Steve's position, I would assume that they were breaking up or broken up. Like, do you even need to have a conversation about whether or not you're broken up after all that? No. Yeah. Like, you're done.
Yeah.
And Jonathan hates him. He knows Jonathan hates him. If Jonathan didn't hate him before he said all of that shit, he certainly hates him now. And he goes back in and he takes up that bat and he, like, beats the shit out of the Demogorgon to save Jonathan. Not because he loves Jonathan, not even because he loves Nancy, because he can't walk away.
Considering that that the show has now, in context, established that Tommy was the one who did the spray painting, this is like an evolution of that because Steve didn't tell him not to. He didn't take any action, and then this moment he does. He takes action. So there's that. Also from like the film side of things, these two sequences, the one with Joyce and the one with Steve, they're shot very differently. We broke down like why that sequence is shot like a horror movie, and it's shot
and I hated it.
Well, because the intent there is to make it seem like she's walking in towards her doom.
Right.
Here, the intent is to make Steve look heroic and to make it look triumphant. And it does. It definitely succeeds in that, because also we leave Steve at his car so that the surprise can be when he reappears. Back in the Upside Down, Joyce and Hopper, they find the Upside Down version of the Byers house, and Joyce and Jonathan can sense each other. I adore that moment.
Yeah, me too.
Because the way Jonathan realizes that this is what Joyce was experiencing with Will all along is just, it's just beautiful. In the interest of some comic relief, meanwhile, Dustin and Lucas raid the school pantry, leaving Mike and Elle alone in the cafeteria. I found the chocolate pudding! Mike talks about when all this is over, with Elle getting her a bed and his parents taking care of her, but not like they'd be brother and sister.
No.
And he asks her to go to the snowball and struggles over whether or not to tell her that he likes her, and they kiss at last. Before we can really sit in that little romantic moment, however, the lab goons arrive and swarm the gym, and Dustin reminds them, Lando.
Yeah, I know there has been a great deal of discussion about, Lando Calrissian and his decisions to work with Vader, and why not only is it understandable, like, nobody really has any place to judge Lando. I think most of us in Lando's position would either have done the same thing or would have been very, very sorely tempted to do the same thing. What's interesting is that I kind of go back and forth about Hopper as Lando. I do understand why he did what he did. I don't condemn him for doing it, but I don't think that it's the same. I think that Lando had a great deal more justification than Hopper did.
I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that, because as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I think it's a question of, even with Hopper, it's like, what's the alternative? So I think that if we were doing a thematic reading of each episode, a la Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, I would think that a theme to be considered for this episode would be desperation, because I think that a lot of the characters exhibit desperation for themselves, for others, and that both leads to good and bad outcomes. I think the kids have every reason to feel betrayed, but yeah, it's an apt comparison. And after giving chase, Elle uses her powers, despite a low battery, to kill their attackers, which drains her and knocks her out cold. And I kind of wonder if there's a little bit of personal revenge mixed up in this moment because of being trapped and blah, blah, blah. But also, like, even more personal than that, in killing Agent Fraser, because this is the woman that killed Benny.
Yeah. I mean, that is exactly what I was thinking of. Anytime Elle stands in front of her friends, I get, like, 5 years added on to the end of my lifespan. Because I love that, the acting and the way she projects that power so much.
When the boys try to revive Elle, Brenner swoops in, and the kids stand up to him as best they can, but the goons grab them anyway, because they are but children.
Yeah, that sequence actually makes me get misty-eyed, because those kids have no authority. They have no physical might to compare to these agents that are armed to the teeth and so on. But the fact that they, like, shout at them and say that, like, you'll have to kill us if you want to get to Elle, and they mean it. It's incredibly moving.
And Elle wakes up, resisting even as Brenner coos at her, promising her a bunch of crap about safety and going home. But we know it's all lies. And so does Elle, apparently, because she just repeats bad over and over again and calls out for Mike. And because of largely of what you just said, is it kind of wrong to feel a little bad for Lucas and Dustin in that moment? She only calls for Mike.
Like, I get that they can't have her be like, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, yeah. She could have just said friends.
Yeah.
She's groggy. She doesn't really know,
Yeah.
The only kind of quibble that I have about Elle's quote-unquote last scene is that when she turns around, she says, goodbye, Mike. I wish that she had said friends.
Oh, the blood draws the Demogorgon, though, which the goons fight off while the boys scoop up Elle and run.
Unsuccessfully. They make themselves great targets, though.
Yeah. Yeah. And dude, if Joyce and Hopper had met the Demogorgon, I'm not sure it would end well for anyone, because Hopper's got a respectable firearm, but
so do all these other assholes. This thing gets hit with machine guns.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over and over. And it just does not even slow it down. Why? Especially when in season 2, the Demodogs get taken down by guns quite easily. Mm-hmm. But Steve is able to, like, fuck its shit up with the bat. He's able to at least herd it toward the trap,
Yeah.
which also affects it, in order to be set on fire, which also affects it.
Yeah.
And yet machine guns,
No effect.
no effect whatsoever. It's like you're blowing air on it.
That makes me remember our conversation about the Upside Down being sentient. The whole, like, when you brought up the point about you weren't worried that Hopper was going to get eaten by the Demogorgon because structure, but you were worried about, like, the closer you get to the Fae thing, the more it affects you.
Right.
So I was kind of going, well, I wonder if we're kind of playing by sort of fantasy rules in a sense, like, because when you said bullets don't affect it, for whatever reason, it made me think, well, bullets don't affect vampires either. And the whole silver bullet thing is the only thing that can take a werewolf down. So it just suddenly made me wonder if that's kind of a thing. Because even then, that made me think of the Nazgul, which the fire hurts it. Because the
water hurts it, but even then.
Well, because it's not even so much about hurting it. It's more that the cloaks are the thing that keep them corporeal, keep them solid. And flame and water make them fall apart. Mm-hmm. So then they can't continue to antagonize. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if maybe that's kind of at play. And then, because I even said to you off mic, I said, you know, maybe I was just kind of wildly speculating, still from a more doubtful place, but I do kind of wonder if this actually may have been their intention. This idea of it must be sent back into the fiery chasm from whence it came. Like it only an upside down based weapon can kill it. Well, Elle is not from the upside down, but she's also, her powers are abnormal and unusual in, like, this particular realm. So it has to be otherworldly of a sort to take it down.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Brenner gets tackled by the Demogorgon and it looks like he dies, but a quote that I have from the book says, "What we always say about that is that if we wanted to really kill Brenner, we would have shown it on screen," Ross says. "Based on what he's done, the audience deserves to actually see it. That's where I want to leave it for now." And to put this in context, this book was written and published before season 3 aired. I really hope that Brenner is still around because I still think he's the best villain.
No, I think you're right. Killing Brenner is a little bit like killing your Moriarty. You don't really want to do that. Now, I will say that I don't necessarily think that seasons 2 and 3 suffered for the lack of Brenner specifically. Like any like criticisms that I have of the plot arcs of that season, it's not, you should have had Brenner here. But absolutely, you keep an ace like him in your back pocket.
Yeah. But I am very glad that there is this possibility that they will bring him back. And I actually really appreciate that they're like, no, for how bad he is, we'll let you watch him die. Don't worry.
I mean, they hardly, you know, for how brutally and violently and gorily they have killed people that we actually like.
Yeah.
You know, I think we deserve to actually watch Brenner die.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I had not thought of that. Barb and Bob and Joyce and Hopper find the monster stash of corpses, including Barb, and a still alive Will with the horrendous tube down his throat. This is really properly nasty. I can't watch this when Hopper pulls that thing out of Will's body. I can't do it. It's almost too real, and I'm glad they get that live thing out of him, but it's rough to watch. Because, I mean, damn, what Will has to live through. Like, this is almost too much for me. Like, as much as I love this show, like, this was another moment where I was like, I don't know if I can accept this. The horror aspect of it is almost beyond my capacity. And I'm really glad that it's Hopper and not me in this moment, because not only, I mean, there's the gross out factor, but also my instinct, honestly, would be to cut the thing so we could get Will out of this setting.
Oh, yeah, but he's not breathing.
Well, no. But what I mean is, like, because my concern every time Hopper just reaches and rips it, like, I'm like, what if that thing was, like, entrenched in his body and it would have, like, killed him ripping it out? So I'm like, well, what if this thing was, like, deep, like, attached to his heart and they needed surgical procedures to get it out of his vital organs? Like, that's always what goes through my head. It's not the intention of the show, however, so again, I'm glad it's Hopper that makes that decision and not me.
I do, like, I am with Hopper 100%. And Harbor's, like, acting and reacting when he sees that, like, the tendril is wriggling, and he goes, "Oh, Jesus!" Like, that is the perfect reaction.
It is. It absolutely is. Back at the school, amid gunfire, Dustin carries Elle over to the desks. And as she lays there, Mike promises that they'll go to the snowball. And it's meaningful still in context, but it's also kind of wonderful to know that they do get to go.
Yeah.
It's like, I know they don't know that, but
Yeah.
hell yeah. And the kids try to fight the Demogorgon. Lucas does his best with the wrist rocket.
I seem to like when there is a character who is severely outgunned, but they keep fighting, not because they think they're going to be successful, but because of some deeply personal reason to themselves. There's nowhere else for them to go. They are fighting to protect Elle. Mm-hmm. Lucas is not going to budge. And I really sincerely love everything about that moment. I love the, like, even the like levity of the dialogue. "Get the rocks, I'm getting the rocks," you know?
Yeah.
And Dustin being like, kill it, and Lucas being like, "I'm working."
Yeah. There's a consistency there too.
Yeah. And it's like the hero shots of Lucas just like firing these rocks. It just gets me every time. I love it.
Me too. Elle rallies enough to take down the Demogorgon and herself with it. I don't actually have a lot of critical analysis to add to this whole sequence. I find that it completely draws me in every time.
Mm-hmm. I really love that when the Demogorgon starts to die, because you start to see the light, and that it actually happens like within the Demogorgon's chest, like where its heart would be, or where we assume a normal animal's heart would be. I mean, to me, it was really meaningful. I actually didn't realize this until I was watching for this recording. But when Elle wakes up and, starts advancing toward the Demogorgon, not only does she have blood under her nose and around her ears, her irises are bloody. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes in American culture, we like hero worship people who sacrifice themselves a little too much. But I don't know, it's so affecting. Mm-hmm. That she says, "No more." I don't think as an audience member that I ever truly thought that Elle was gone. So when she turns around and says goodbye to him, I never thought of her saying, "Okay, I'm dying, bye." Mm. I always read that as, "I'm not going to see you anymore." It doesn't lessen the impact. Just how sad and poignant. I mean, she packs everything into those two words. How much she loves him, how much she wanted to have the life that they talked about, how hard it is to give it up.
They were going to have Elle die here. That was the initial intention. And they changed their minds once they realized that the show was going to have potential to move on. They knew that the show really just wouldn't work without 11.
Yeah. I mean, I can say definitively, if Elle had actually died, I would be pissed off, angry about it for a variety of reasons, certainly including the fact that I just love Elle, but also giving a girl that much power and then having her not only sacrifice the power, but sacrifice her life for a boy she just met and a boy she hasn't even met. Ooh, that's dirty.
A boy? For Will. Okay.
For Will, yeah.
Who are you talking about?
I mean, I believe in the relationship between Mike and 11. Don't get me wrong. But even hearing that was originally the plan, well,
Mike's reaction to 11 being gone, the character and the performance is just so heartbreaking. And I completely believe that this would fuck him up for the next full year. And this, of course, leads directly into Hopper and Joyce finding Will.
Yeah.
Intercut with Hopper's final memories of Sarah. And this sequence is just so emotional. I do feel that I'm affected by the scene with Elle and Mike and Dustin and Lucas too. But for whatever reason, this is the sequence that just absolutely gets me every time. And just there are tears consistently. It works on every level. The musical score, the editing, the performances, the sound, the cinematography. Each element is just firing on all cylinders, as a good finale should. And the editing, excellent work, Mr. Dean Zimmerman, who also edited the Battle of Starcourt in season 3,
Huh.
which is also the season finale.
Yeah.
Along with Catherine Naranjo, first assistant editor across all 3 seasons. And the needle drop here is When It's Cold I'd Like to Die by Moby, and the use of music tracks across the series, I would say as a whole, is pretty well chosen. They often, and in like cases like this, they will find songs that really do match the musical score very well, very seamlessly, as this track does. So in this instance, I want to give credit to the music supervisor, Nora Felder, and once again, Michael Stein and Kyle Dixon for the score, plus David Klotz, the music editor, because just the way that it all folds together is just really beautiful.
If you had said to me, okay, like, we're finally going to find Will, and they're going to perform CPR because he's not breathing, and you're not sure if he's going to make it, but then he, like, sits up and coughs, and then, like, they're getting the oxygen mask for him, and we're going to play the song When It's Cold I'd Like to Die, I would be like, you're fired. You know? Like,
Yeah.
But it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
The soundscape, as it were, in this show is consistently on point. It's really, really seamless across all 3 seasons. Karen and Ted Wheeler arrive at Hawkins Middle, and a frightened Karen embraces Mike while Ted talks to the paramedic. And this, I couldn't help but marvel at the amazing parallels between the 3 sets of parents, between Hopper, Joyce, and Karen, all expressing different concerns for their own children on different levels, but all 3 experiences are entirely reasonable, and their differences relate to their specific ordeals. Hopper, who lost his daughter, Joyce, who's getting her son back after the possibility of losing him, but he has a long recovery ahead of him, and Karen, whose son was never lost, but who could have been. He's okay at the end, but he is now emotionally wounded and racked with grief. And the parents' shared experience is relief. Hopper doesn't get his daughter back, but he does save Will. And Karen is relieved that her son is safe, while Joyce finally has her son back after a whole season's worth of fear. And I just was, like, blown away by that. Like, I think it registered on some subconscious level, but especially because we've been paying such close attention to Karen this season, it really made me appreciate the shared experience that they're having. And especially considering that Hopper and Joyce are together and Karen is separate, but they are all tied together. And I thought that was really, really very wonderfully crafted.
That is a great point. Every time I watch this episode, I'm kind of just, like, really, in a good way, just kind of struck with, like, how much of a mom Karen is in that moment, you know, depending on our relationships with our families. But I think we all kind of look back sometimes and have that, like, I want my mommy kind of moment. And she's bringing that to Mike. As much as he is traumatized and grief-stricken, and as much as that is completely the appropriate response, this is going to be one of those moments where he's really going to benefit from having his mom.
Really made me miss my mom in that moment, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Karen is a character that is going to... I think a lot of people don't pay attention to her until the 2nd season, and I think that that's a character that's going to continue to garner more and more praise as the show ages. And we fade out and then back in as Will wakes up in the hospital, and he asks if Jonathan is okay when he sees his bandaged hand, which made me think of your point from a couple episodes ago when Jonathan is in the police station and he asks Nancy if she's okay. So I'm like, well, brothers.
Runs in the family. They are very loving.
Yeah. And the entire cast is in the waiting room. Even Steve and Ted.
It's cute. The whole gang.
And Jonathan comes out to signal the boys that they can come in and see Will, and the boys rush the bed. And I love that Dustin remembers to tell him that Jennifer Hayes cried at his funeral, because he said, like, just wait till we tell this to Will. And then he does. He remembers. It was just a really nice attention to detail. I liked that a lot.
Yeah. So, you know, you've got Will looking very, like, you know, pale and damsel in distressy, you know, on the bed. And then the 3 buddies come in, and in this very somber, very serious moment, and they're just like, oh my God, Troy peed himself, and Jennifer Hayes is crying at your funeral. And I said out loud, oh, holy shit, they're the Hobbits. And it actually reminds me so much of both the scene in Fellowship of the Ring and Return of the King.
Yeah.
When, Frodo is laid up for very obvious reasons, and then, his other Hobbit buddies, first Sam, then the others come in and they're like, hey, Frodo! And how it's just this, like, really sweet, heartwarming moment. I just think it's adorable.
I mean, I think it's a really fair assessment because the fact is, like, Lucas and Dustin have a very Merry Pippin-esque relationship, and I would say that Will is kind of our Frodo in that moment, so I buy it. They tell Will all about Eleven, and I wonder, too, if this stuff was scripted necessarily, or if they were just kind of directed to improv through it. Just summarize what happened with 11, how cool it was, race to be the first to tell each part of the story, go, And then outside the hospital, mysterious lab guys pick up Hopper.
That made no sense, and I really kind of wish that they had cut that.
It just feels to me like set up for something that never went anywhere.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't track with what they then do. Like, Hopper, yes, is working with the lab next season, but it's not in this. Like, the first time I watched it, I was sure they were taking him away to go kill him. And, like, it still has that vibe to it, which is weird because the show is so good about setup and payoff.
Yeah.
1 month later, the boys finish their D&D campaign in an echo and a continuation of the opening scene of them together. And it's like a complete redo, changing only once Justin agrees Fireball the son of a bitch.
So I have a question.
Yes.
I feel so proud of myself for seeing this. They see that it's the Thessal Hydra. Will makes the executive decision to cast Fireball. He then should have to roll to see if it hits. Yeah?
Yeah, that's what he does.
And then he should have to roll to see what the damage is. But he only did one roll. And then he killed it in one blow?
Well, my guess is that because Mike is wanting to wrap the campaign up, that's probably why they went with that. But yes, so no, I wondered that too. There's the roll to hit it, the roll, and then the roll for damage. So, but all of this is speculative because I only know D&D 5e. I'll shout out to any D&D listeners who know way more about Dungeons and Dragons than I do. How does this hold up to you? Because I like I said, I'm still very new to D&D. But I think, like I said, I think it's mostly in the interest of Mike wants to wrap the campaign now.
Yeah.
We have our very meta moment of, that's not it, is it? And Jonathan comes to pick up Will, and as they leave, Dustin and Lucas wrestle which leaves Mike to glance over at the empty fort, which must have been reset up. Yeah, because Mike knocked it down in episode 6. And it's a lovely metaphor, though, for how Mike's response is going to be more distinct than the others. Not to say that the others won't feel the loss of Elle, but I think it's fair to say that the connection between she and Mike did run a little deeper.
Yeah.
As we discussed.
Yeah.
As the buyers leave, Karen tells them to say hello to their mom. And Nancy catches Jonathan on his way out as well and gives him the gift, which is the camera. And just as another observation, she's still wearing the ballet shoes necklace here. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, yeah, these two are so into each other.
Yeah.
I can't even believe I didn't see it at first. I'm not that I was against it again, but it was just like, maybe. I'm not trying to sink the ship necessarily, but I certainly wasn't on board just yet. I was stunned, however, initially, that then she turns around and she's still with Steve. I couldn't believe it. That floored me.
Yeah.
I might have wanted to set fire to that vessel, but now, like, joking aside, this does make sense to me that they would resolve what happened. I feel like they would have talked and worked it out, a month later.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
But at the same time, Nancy looks noticeably uncertain after she curls up next to Steve, while he looks very happy and content, and genuinely so. I don't mean that to be contrite or like, nah, sucker,
No,
like,
not at all.
Yeah, it's very sweet, especially from the post-season 3 perspective. He knows she gave Jonathan the camera, and isn't even the slightest bit suspicious or shitty about it, to the point where he remains oblivious to her sort of uncertainty in that moment. At the police station, Hopper packs up some of the Christmas party potluck food and then bounces, albeit after a sweet little moment with Flo. And this is a really random detail too, but I actually recognize that olive green container that he has.
Oh, same.
Like, my mom has the larger one of it to this day. We used to use it my whole life growing up for leftover spaghetti. That's like what that dish was for.
My mom has like an entire set.
Oh, really?
Of that, but it's in this like, it's a really nice like neutral cream tan kind of color.
Yeah.
And like, dude, that 80s Tupperware hits different. Like, it's actually high quality. Yep. Oh, man.
And Hopper drives out to the woods and places said container in a box, along with some Eggos. I don't know where they shot this bit by the road or when, but it looks like real snow and ice to me.
Yeah.
You know, on the ground, anyway. In the woods, debatable. That might be a set. But brief shout out to Tony Holly and Sean Crane, locations manager and location scout respectively. Because in general, the locations in this series are phenomenal. Because really, I mean, Hawkins, Indiana feels like absolutely a real place. And Christmas with the Byers.
Yeah, with runny potatoes.
Until Will coughs up the slug-like thing and he gets a flash of the Upside Down. When I first saw this, too, I presumed that this was like an ongoing thing he was dealing with, that this was not the first slug that he'd coughed up, and that he was keeping it secret for a while. And now it seems like that's not the case. That seems like now this was a one-time event and this creature becomes Dart. That would also explain why, for example, none of Will's like charts or medical readouts or any of the blood work or any x-rays showed a thing inside his stomach or his chest, because Dart grows really fast. So if it had, again, that's kind of why I thought that was probably an Aliens reference, because if it's like there's a thing implanted in him, it wouldn't show up because it was still small. But he coughs when he's in the hospital bed, so I don't know. But Will does keep it secret, which super stressed me out, still does. And largely because I know that feeling really well of like wanting to hide something you're struggling with from your loved ones, but this is next level. Seriously though, this poor child. Like, can Will not be the center point of the conflict in season 4? Can we really, like, truly give this child a break? Like, almost to the point where, like, if Will wasn't in the 4th season because he's, like, away somewhere, like, as much as I would hate to not see him and not see Noah Schnapp.
He can Skype in. It's like, fine. They had Skype in 1986. Like, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, they've got Dustin making, like, radio transmitters and stuff, you know, come on. It does seem to me, though, that they, in this final scene, that zoom or that dolly shot out of the Byers' kitchen, underscored by the main theme, it really does feel that they've set up a deliberate to be continued feel. The score has a naturally daunting tone anyway, and the shot trucking backwards slowly out the window, it just really gives me a vibe of, and this is where we leave our heroes until next time. Stay tuned. Like, it has, I mean, they're even vignetted literally by snow through the glass. So, you know, I feel that every time, but also weirdly a sense of completion.
It's not a cliffhanger. You do have, there are many, many, many points for possible continuation, but it's not being shitty by ending on a cliffhanger and trying to almost like force the issue of a second season. Like, if it did just end at one season, literally to just ignore the slug and just assume that everything else worked out and that Elle was able to come back and that Hopper did somehow plan something, and that's why he's putting the food out there, because he knows where she's in hiding, which turns out to be the case. And, you know, it would be very easy to just accept season 1 as a complete story. I'm very glad that there's more, but I do respect a lot that they didn't try to force the issue.
And it's funny that you say that, because there's a lot, I feel like, there's a large contingent of the fandom right now that is very vocal about the fact that even people I've heard that enjoyed season 3 quite a lot, liked it more than the second season, have said that they wished it was still just one. And everyone's entitled to their own opinion.
Right.
I'm not even saying, like, you're wrong, but I personally would have been very unsatisfied if they left it here. Not like they did a bad job with the conclusion, but I feel like I would have been, I don't know, I very much like the 3 boys. I wanted to know what happened to the Lost Knight and the Proud Princess. Like, I would, you know, the thing that I like to remind people is that if we'd ended here, it means we wouldn't have gone on to get Max, Bob, Dad Steve, Erica, Murray, Nancy, and Jonathan getting together, to say nothing of Eleven's return.
Right.
At the same time, though, I didn't realize how big of a fan I was of this show. Because this show, this shot happened, the credits rolled, and I just kind of remember sitting there going, huh, that just happened. I can see why this show is really popular. I don't feel that I've wasted my time.
Yeah.
The moment I knew I was a fan, when I knew I was like, oh no, this show has me, was when the Comic-Con, the San Diego Comic-Con trailer dropped. the one that's to Thriller. And I realized that my reaction to that trailer, first of all, that is an amazing trailer. All of the trailers for this show have been phenomenal. But at the same time, I was so emotionally invested, like, right away. The fact that it had me just so, like, instinctively. I like these characters. I can't wait to see them again. I really do want to know what the next chapter is, literally. Yeah, give me more. I'm really glad that we go back to Hawkins after this.
Yeah.
Because I do think that season 2 is better than people tend to give it credit for.
Yeah, it's so, like, it bums me out to hear you tell me of other, you know, reviews that you have heard about season 2, because my experience with season 2, both myself and, like, having talked about it with other people, has always been really positive. But my kind of relationship to the show really hasn't been one of engaging too much in the fandom or with critical analysis. I just really like it, and I like talking about it, and I know you do too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't have that feeling of, like, defensiveness towards season 2, only because I haven't really heard anybody trash it.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the whole first season. I love this show.
Yeah.
In spite of everything, I still love the show a whole lot. And with that said, this concludes our contemplations on Chapter 8, The Upside Down. Thank you for listening. If you've got comments or questions or thoughts, join the conversation. You can follow us on Instagram and Tumblr at Coffee and Contemplation Pod on both. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider leaving us a review. Coffee and Contemplation is available on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever podcasts are available.
Thanks again for listening.
We'll see you next time.
Over and out.
The monster, the bathtub, the upside down. I'm gonna list those again because we stumbled through that.
The one with one with Elle. The one with Troy.
But I'm like, it's bigger,
and it's very mustache twisty.
They're really non-specific.
Yeah, let's leave season 3 for 3 and C. Let's.
Yeah. but I am very glad that there.